Hello, everyone. My name is David Lewis. I am a Sethian Gnostic as well as a priest within the Gnostic Union. And today we're going to get into this short Gnostic sermon that I wrote. And if you're like me, you are a huge Star Wars fan. Star Wars has been a part of my life since I can consciously remember. I'm one of those fans that has a replica lightsaber. I'm always on YouTube looking at lore videos. I'm watching all the movies. I also remember as a child rewatching Return of the Jedi on VHS over and over again. It's actually kind of funny because growing up, I never had A New Hope, the first Star Wars, and The Empire Strikes Back, but I had Return of the Jedi. And actually, one of my first conscious memories of going to the movies with my family was when my mother took me to see Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, in 1999. As I grew up, my love for this franchise transcended simply loving the sci fi elements to recognizing the spiritual concepts that director George Lucas wrote into the story. The Jedi and the Sith, the dark and the light side of the Force, even the concept of the Force itself. I think people forget that lightsabers and action aside, that the Jedi and the Sith are first and foremost, an order of mystics, and that the spiritual elements inside Star Wars are not far removed from our own world. Now, we may not be able to move things with our mind, with the will, or use the force, but meditation, the concepts of patience, the way anger gives way to something sinister in our lives if left unchecked, and balance with forgiveness and non attachment, these elements are not foreign to us. See, Star Wars is rooted in what I call transcendent mythology, meaning that although the series is entirely fake, it still speaks to us on a deeper spiritual level. People get caught up on that word mythology because in the Western mind, mythology is synonymous with fake or not true, and more importantly, not having any sort of historical basis in reality, if that makes sense. Hence why Christians get offended when you say Christian mythology, because in their mind, you're calling Christianity fake. The characters are archetypes of our own selves. Darth Vader doesn't need to have existence to actually have us recognize a Darth Vader when we see one. The old hermit on Tatooine, Ben Kenobi, many of us have older figures in our lives or had older figures in our lives that impart wisdom to us, often drawing from their own trauma and insights they have gained over the years. The reason I bring this up because as a Gnostic, when I began to loosen my extreme disdain of the Bible and the message of Jesus in its Christian context and allow myself to see and receive what Jesus as a spiritual master was saying without the judgment and baggage or the religion that was founded in his name, I saw the transcendent message. I often make the joke with my friends and family that I understand more of what Jesus was saying now that I'm not a Christian versus when I was one and wanted to be a pastor. And I do want to stress this. I'm saying the message in words of Jesus, Yeshua, not Paul. But that's a different story for a different day. One day I went to the bookstore and I came across a book nestled like far off in the philosophy section by author Matthew Bordelin titled The Zen of R2D2. The book deals with Zen Buddhist philosophy in the Star Wars universe. And I do want to stress this before we get deeper into this sermon that the book does deal with Zen Buddhism, not Sethian or Gnostic thinking. But the author goes into the Zen Buddhist concept of signlessness. This sign in signlessness deals with the outward opinion and label we assign to something. In Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke Skywalker goes to the planet Dagobah in search for the legendary Jedi Master Yoda, Luke does not recognize Yoda as this Jedi Master because in Luke's mind, a Jedi Master looks and acts a certain way. And to make things more complicated, Yoda purposely puts on a show for him, acting like a crazy old fool, only to reveal himself later as the Jedi Master the young apprentice is seeking. When I was reading the book, it dawned on me that this is what Jesus was referring to when he chastises the religious leaders of his day when they are asking him for a sign. Now, before we get into the text, in my own personal spiritual life, I do want to make the confession that the canonical gospels do not play a major role with me as a Sethian Gnostic today, outside maybe the Gospel of John. But I do realize that you shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And with that being said, in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12, and this translation I'm reading, translated by Bishop Nathan Wilson, we read, Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered this, saying, Teacher, We want slash wish to see a sign from you. And then he answered and said to them, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks a sign, and no sign will be given to you except the sign of Jonah the prophet. Now, when I was a Christian, I was puzzled sometimes as to why Jesus is so upset with the religious leaders for asking for a sign. Sure, we know that the Pharisees were more than likely trying to trap Jesus, but I think it would be unwise to think that there may not have been genuine men among this group who were genuinely asking Jesus for a sign. Nicodemus, for example, was a Jewish religious leader of his day, and he came to Jesus on some real shit. Excuse my language. But reading this in the Zen of R2D2, it gave me a window for an interpretation of this verse I never considered. And I do want to stress this. This is simply my interpretation based off this book that I read. I do not get like getting on the internet, especially when you're dealing with spiritual and religious concepts, trying to come off as that my view is the only view or the only true view. The beauty of mythology is that there are layers that are present within them. The Pharisees were looking for a Messiah, no different than many Jews of their era. But Jesus presented something that they were not expecting because their spiritual arrogance said that this needs to look like this, and if it doesn't, it isn't true. Our Messiah needs to look and act like this. They were caught up in signs. And not only them, but even the disciples were constantly asking Jesus, when will the kingdom of heaven come? This was not some mystical thing to them. The Messiah was supposed to destroy the oppressor at this time, the Roman Empire, and rule as the king of Israel on earth. During this time period, especially right before we get the story of the New Testament, we see a lot of Jewish apocalypses. And I once read that the need to look for the end times is often the mark of defeated men. In my opinion, the disciple of Jesus, Peter, may have had very zealous views about freeing Israel from the Roman Empire, hence why he is often ready to draw a sword, and according to the Gospel of Mary, a Gnostic text, was, and I quote, always known to have been a wrathful person. He has all the markings of a warrior. It is also Peter that out of all the disciples seems to have been the focus of showcasing his deep personal transformation by the message of Jesus. They were all missing the point of Jesus because they were too caught up looking for a sign of Jesus or the Messiah. Signs, says the Diamond Sutra of Zen Buddhism, can be illusionary and deceptive. This may be controversial, and I may get canceled for this, but what's Gnosticism without a little controversy? In reality, anybody could have been doing what Jesus was doing. One of my favorite books, Not Magic and Christianity by author Robert Connor, opened my eyes to this, especially when you look at the New Testament with the original Greek wording. We get caught up on the quote unquote miracles that Jesus did, but the world in which Jesus lived, there were many men claiming to do miracles and conjure things. Remember in the book of Exodus, when Moses turned his rod into a serpent, the Pharaoh was able to get his magician to do the exact same thing, according to that story. But see, that was the entire point, in my opinion. As long as we're looking for the superficial clothing on something, and especially in spirituality, we miss the true gem. Going back to Star Wars, beneath the black-clad Sith Lord that was Darth Vader was a man who was afraid of having to learn to let go. We see Vader and simply see evil villain. And while he does fulfill the role as a villain, he ultimately is turned back to the light side by his son, because his son sees the deeper reality of Vader and is willing to fight for it. We see Yoda and see a small old hermit that speaks backwards living on a swamp planet, and yet in reality it's the most powerful Jedi that ever lived. See, signs can be helpful and aren't all bad. They can help us also with a certain level of discernment or having a certain level of discernment. But signs can ultimately deceive us if we aren't careful and ultimately lead to our destruction, holding on to the view that something should look and act how we were raised to think it should look and act, how we've been taught to think it should look and act, even our own personal biases we need to keep in checked. But let me know what you guys are thinking and ask yourself this question: what is going on and what is happening in your life where signs deceived you or the need for a sign deceived you? Let me know what you guys are thinking, and you all have a blessed day.